He wasn't fighting a battle. He was hiding from one, in a pit carved out for pressing grain, not for warriors, but for cowards who didn't want to be seen. That's where God found him. Not on a mountaintop, not in a temple, but in a winepress soaked in fear and failure. And from the shadows, God didn't say, "You're weak. You failed. You're done." No. God looked straight into the shell of a man and said something the world would laugh at. "Mighty warrior." Not because he was one, but because heaven doesn't speak to who you were. It calls out the fire you stopped believing was still inside. This story isn't just about Gideon. It's about you. Have you ever felt like God made a mistake by looking your way? Have you ever wanted to do something meaningful, but your fears whispered, "Not you. You're not enough." You pray, but deep down, you're just hoping God doesn't actually ask you to do anything hard. You want to be used, but part of you is still hiding in your own version of a wine press. Maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you're not lost. Maybe you're just scared, just like Gideon was. But here's the truth. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And sometimes the ones hiding the most are the ones he plans to use the loudest. This video isn't just about Gideon's courage. It's about your calling, your doubts, your moment to rise. Part 1. God shows up in the hiding place. You know what's strange? Most of us imagine God showing up in holy places. A mountaintop, a church, somewhere quiet and full of light. But Gideon, God found him in a hole in the ground. Not metaphorically, literally. A winepress, dug deep into the earth, not made for battle, but for crushing grapes. And that day, it was crushing something else. Gideon's courage, his identity, his hope. He wasn't praying. He wasn't worshiping. He was hiding, just trying to survive. Not thrive, not lead, just get through the day. Without being noticed. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Some of us live like that. We're not chasing big dreams. We're just trying to make it to tomorrow, keeping our heads down, pretending we're fine, while hiding all the parts of us that are tired and afraid. That's where God shows up. No thunder, no miracles, just a voice that breaks into the silence. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Pause for a second. Let that land. Mighty... what? Gideon isn't fighting. He isn't even standing. He's crouched in fear. From an enemy. From his own doubts. From himself. And yet, God calls him something that doesn't match what he feels or what he sees in the mirror. That's what grace does. It doesn't describe who you are today. It speaks to who you were created to become. Gideon doesn't believe it. Not for a second. He argues, "My clan is the weakest, and I'm the least in my family." Translation: "You've got the wrong guy, God. I don't have what it takes." But God doesn't argue back. He doesn't flatter. He doesn't correct Gideon's resume. He says something deeper, something that silences every excuse. "I will be with you." That's it. No pep talk, no 5-step plan, just presence. And maybe that's all we really need. Because maybe faith doesn't start with confidence. It starts with being found, in the very place we hoped no one would ever see. Maybe your wine press doesn't look like Gideon's. Maybe it's your bedroom at 2 a.m., your inbox full of unread messages, your heart full of things you haven't said out loud in years. But there, in that quiet place, where fear whispers and hope feels far, God speaks anyway, not to judge you, not to pressure you, but to remind you who you are. And that's where everything begins. Not when you feel strong, not when you feel holy, but when you're still hiding. And God calls you by your true name. Let that sit with you. Because what God says next might just be the most uncomfortable, beautiful, world-shifting moment in Gideon's life. And maybe in yours, too. Part 2. The call sounds nothing like who you are now. It's almost ironic. God doesn't meet Gideon on a battlefield. He meets him in a wine press, while he's hiding, afraid, ashamed, and not just from enemies, but from purpose and from himself. And the very first words God speaks? "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Not, "You there, coward." Not, "Let's work on your fear first." Not even, "Get up." Just, "Mighty warrior." Let's be real. If that were you, would you believe it? Because I wouldn't. I'd look around wondering, is someone else here? He can't be talking to me. And Gideon, he felt exactly the same. His response isn't excitement. It's not worship. It's raw doubt. If you're with us, why has all this happened? Where are the miracles we heard about? I'm the least from the weakest tribe. In other words, God, you've clearly got the wrong guy. But that's the thing. God wasn't describing Gideon as he was. He was calling out the version of Gideon he already saw. On the other side of obedience. He wasn't speaking to the fear. He was speaking through it, straight to the fire that Gideon had buried, to the purpose hidden beneath years of playing small. Here's what we forget. God never calls you based on who you are now. He calls you based on who He's shaping you to become. And that calling? It often feels too bold, too soon, too impossible. But that discomfort, that gap between how you see yourself and what God calls you, that is not confusion. It's confirmation. It means He's stretching you, pulling your name out from under the rubble of insecurity, lifting your future out of the fog of fear. Because God sees something in you that fear's been sitting on for far too long. Maybe He's already called you, but you brushed it off. You thought, that's for someone more gifted, more disciplined, more anything but me. But listen, God doesn't base His call on your resume. He anchors it in His purpose. He sees the battles you haven't fought yet, the courage you haven't discovered yet, the leadership you never thought was in you. And He still says, that one, that's who I want. Even now, in your doubt, in your weakness, in your hiding. Because that's where transformation begins. Not when you finally feel worthy, but when you finally realize He's calling you anyway. So the next time you hear something from God that feels too big to wear, too far off to be true, pause and ask yourself, what if the thing that scares me most to believe is actually the deepest truth about who I really am? That's where it begins. Not with striving, but with surrender. Because once God speaks identity over you, the next thing He invites you into is trust. Not in your ability, but in His presence. Let's go there next. Part 3. God shrinks the army to prove the source of victory. So let's recap. God finds Gideon in hiding, calls him a mighty warrior, and gives him a mission that sounds impossible. You will deliver Israel from the Midianites. And slowly, hesitantly, Gideon says yes. But here's the twist. Right when it looks like things are coming together, God starts pulling things apart. Gideon rallies 32,000 men. That's a good army. Still outnumbered, but strong. And then God says something that makes no sense at all. You have too many men. Too many? What kind of battle plan is that? But God isn't strategizing. He's purifying. He tells Gideon to send home everyone who's afraid. 22,000 leave, just like that. Then He trims it down again, by how they drink water of all things. And before Gideon can blink, he's left with just 300 men. That's not a battalion. That's a prayer group. And they're going up against an enemy so large, Scripture says they were as numerous as locusts, armed, ruthless, trained. So what does God give Gideon's 300? Not swords, not spears, not armor. He gives them jars, torches, and trumpets. It's not a strategy, it's a statement. I don't need numbers. I don't need strength. I need trust. Think about that for a second. What if the reason things are shrinking in your life isn't because you're failing, but because God is setting the stage for something He, and only He, can take credit for? Sometimes God strips you down, not to punish you, but to make sure you don't forget where the power comes from. Because when you win with 32,000, people say, you were smart. When you win with 300, people say, only God could have done that. And that's the kind of victory God loves, the kind no one else can claim, the kind that makes heaven undeniable. Maybe you've been wondering why you're losing support, why doors are closing, why things feel smaller instead of bigger. But maybe, just maybe, God is shrinking your army to amplify His glory. He's not preparing you for a bigger platform. He's preparing you for a deeper dependency. Because real power isn't found in your resources. It's found in your reliance. And so, Gideon obeys. He goes to battle with 300 jars and some noise. And you know what happens? Panic, confusion, collapse. The enemy turns on itself, and Israel wins without lifting a sword. Because that's what happens when your weakness gets out of the way of God's power. Now let's bring it home. Gideon's story isn't just about victory. It's about surrender. It's about a man who stopped measuring himself by what he had and started trusting who was with him. And maybe that's where your battle turns too. God's power begins where you feel small. You might feel like you've been overlooked, disqualified, too small, too broken. But that's not how God sees you, not even close. In fact, the very things you believe disqualify you might be the exact places where He plans to show His power. Gideon wasn't strong. He wasn't bold. He wasn't even willing at first. But God didn't wait for Gideon to be ready. He stepped into the pit, spoke into the fear, and called out a warrior from a man who didn't even believe in himself. Gideon's life didn't change because he suddenly became brave. It changed because he finally dared to believe that God could do something through someone like him. And maybe that's your moment now. Maybe you've been waiting to feel more spiritual, more consistent, more put together. But what if God is already calling you? Not for what you are today, but for who He sees you becoming. Don't wait to feel whole. Don't wait to feel holy. God doesn't call the ready, He calls the willing. And when He meets you in your wine press, He's not focused on your hiding. He's calling you by name. The name only heaven knows. So if you're tired of shrinking, tired of surviving quietly in the dark, it's time. Time to rise. Time to believe. Time to let God lead the next chapter. Because He's not done with your story. And this might just be the part where everything changes. If you saw yourself in Gideon's story, in the fear, in the doubts, in the hiding, then you need to hear about Peter, a man who failed publicly, but wasn't thrown away. He was still chosen. Watch the next video, when Peter failed, but God didn't give up. Let it remind you, grace doesn't quit on people, not even the ones who've quit on themselves.